The morning mist hung heavy over Ravenscroft Castle as Captain Marcus Thornfield adjusted his ceremonial sword and began his routine inspection of the grounds. The ancient stone fortress had stood sentinel over the Scottish Highlands for nearly 8 centuries, its weathered walls holding secrets that most would never know. Marcus had served the royal family for 15 years, rising through the ranks from a simple guardsman to the captain of the elite Royal Protection Unit. His dedication was unwavering, his loyalty absolute. The disappearance of Lady Charlotte Pemberton had shaken the entire royal household to its core. 3 weeks had passed since the young Duchess vanished without a trace from her chambers during the annual Highland Festival. She was beloved by all who knew her, a vibrant 24-year-old with auburn hair and emerald eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence. Charlotte had been staying at Ravenscroft as a guest of the royal family, attending the traditional ceremonies that marked the changing of seasons. Marcus remembered that final evening clearly. Charlotte had danced with such joy at the festival, her laughter echoing through the great hall as she spun in her emerald gown. The delicate silver bracelet on her wrist had caught the candlelight as she moved, a family heirloom passed down through generations of Pemberton women. It was adorned with tiny diamonds and bore the family crest, a phoenix rising from flames, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. The investigation had consumed every waking moment of Marcus's life since that terrible morning when Charlotte's maid, Agnes, had discovered her empty bed. The sheets were still warm, suggesting she had left recently, but there were no signs of struggle. Her evening gown lay carefully folded on the chair, and her jewelry box sat undisturbed on the vanity. Everything appeared normal except for one crucial detail: Charlotte was nowhere to be found. The local constabulary had been called immediately, followed by Scotland Yard's finest detectives. They had combed through every inch of the castle and its surrounding grounds. Bloodhounds had sniffed along countless trails that led nowhere. The nearby villages had been searched thoroughly, with every cottage and barn examined. Rivers had been dragged, forests scoured, and mountains climbed. Yet Charlotte remained missing, as if she had simply vanished into the Highland mist. Marcus had coordinated with the search teams, his military training proving invaluable in organizing the massive effort. He had interviewed every staff member, every guest, and every person who had been present during the festival. The stories were consistent: Charlotte had retired to her chambers around midnight, appearing tired but happy after the evening's festivities. Agnes had helped her prepare for bed, and that was the last anyone had seen of her. The captain's days began before dawn and ended well past midnight as he pursued every possible lead. He had examined Charlotte's personal effects repeatedly, searching for any clue that might explain her disappearance. Her diary revealed nothing unusual: entries about the beauty of the Highlands, her excitement about the festival, and her growing fondness for a young lord she had met during her stay. There were no hints of distress or plans to leave. The royal family was devastated. Queen Margaret had known Charlotte since she was a child, watching her grow from a precocious little girl into a remarkable young woman. The Queen had personally requested that no stone be left unturned in the search for Charlotte, and she had full confidence in Marcus's abilities to lead the investigation. The pressure was immense, but Marcus thrived under such circumstances, his focus becoming laser-sharp when lives hung in the balance. As the weeks passed with no breakthrough, Marcus found himself returning again and again to the castle's lower levels. Ravenscroft had been built on the site of an even older fortress, and its foundations contained a labyrinth of cellars, storage rooms, and forgotten chambers. Some areas hadn't been explored in decades, sealed off by cave-ins or simply forgotten as the castle evolved over the centuries. The damp cellars held a particular fascination for Marcus. These underground chambers had served various purposes throughout the castle's history: wine storage, food preservation, and, during times of war, shelter for the castle's inhabitants. The stone walls wept with moisture, and the air carried the musty scent of centuries. Torches flickered in their ancient sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper of long-forgotten secrets. Marcus had assigned teams to search these areas multiple times, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been overlooked. His instincts, honed by years of military service and security work, told him that the answer to Charlotte's disappearance lay somewhere within these ancient walls. He had learned to trust these intuitions; they had saved lives before and had never led him astray. On this particular morning, as the Highland mist swirled around the castle towers, Marcus decided to conduct another personal inspection of the cellars. He armed himself with a powerful torch and a detailed map of the castle's lower levels that had been drawn up by the royal architect decades earlier. Some of the passages shown on the map had been sealed or altered over time, but it remained the most comprehensive guide to the underground maze. The descent into the cellars always felt like traveling back through time. The temperature dropped noticeably as Marcus made his way down the stone steps, worn smooth by countless feet over the centuries. The walls gradually changed from the refined stonework of the upper castle to the rougher, more primitive construction of the original fortress. These stones had been laid by medieval masons, each one fitted with precision that modern builders could barely match. The first level of cellars contained the wine storage and preserved food stores. Marcus had searched this area thoroughly on previous occasions, but he moved through it systematically once again, his torch beam probing every corner and crevice. The wine racks stretched into the darkness, bottles covered with decades of dust creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Nothing seemed disturbed since his last visit. Moving deeper into the underground network, Marcus reached areas that were rarely visited. These chambers had once housed the castle's armory and served as quarters for the guard during sieges. The air grew thicker with moisture, and the sound of his footsteps echoed strangely in the confined spaces. Water had seeped through the ancient mortar in places, creating small pools on the uneven floor. It was in one of these forgotten chambers that Marcus's systematic search began to yield results. His torchlight fell upon a section of wall where the stones appeared newer than their surroundings. The mortar was a slightly different color, and the stones themselves bore tool marks that didn't match the weathering patterns of the adjacent areas. This wall had been rebuilt or repaired at some point in the not-too-distant past. Marcus examined the wall more closely, running his hands along the stone surface. The mortar was solid, but there were small gaps where water had begun to erode the binding material. As he pressed against various stones, testing their stability, one shifted slightly under pressure. The movement was subtle, but Marcus's trained senses detected it immediately. Working carefully with the tools from his utility belt, Marcus began to probe the loose stone. It was positioned about chest height and appeared to be a keystone in the wall's construction. As he applied gentle pressure and worked to loosen the mortar around its edges, the stone gradually gave way. Behind it lay a hollow space, perfectly dark and silent. The discovery sent a surge of adrenaline through Marcus's system. Hidden chambers and secret passages were not uncommon in castles of Ravenscroft's age, but finding one during his investigation of Charlotte's disappearance seemed too coincidental to ignore. He carefully removed the loose stone completely, revealing an opening just large enough for a person to crawl through. The beam of his torch penetrated the darkness beyond the opening, illuminating what appeared to be a small chamber carved from the living rock beneath the castle. The space was perhaps 8 feet square and tall enough for a person to stand upright. The walls were rough-hewn stone, and the floor was covered with accumulated debris and moisture that had seeped through the ceiling over many years. Marcus knew he should call for backup before entering the hidden chamber, but his instincts urged him forward. Time could be critical if Charlotte was somehow connected to this discovery. He squeezed through the opening, his uniform scraping against the rough stone edges, and dropped down into the concealed space. The chamber was empty of any obvious clues, but Marcus methodically searched every surface with his torch beam. The walls bore no markings or inscriptions that might indicate the chamber's original purpose. The floor was uneven, with pools of stagnant water collecting in the low spots. The smell was musty and stale, suggesting the chamber had been sealed for a considerable time. As Marcus moved his torch beam across the floor for the third time, something caught his attention near the far corner of the chamber. A small object glinted in the torchlight, barely visible among the debris and standing water. He moved closer, his heart beginning to race as the shape became more familiar. Half buried in the accumulated silt and moisture lay a delicate piece of jewelry. Marcus knelt carefully in the damp conditions and used a small tool from his kit to gently extract the object from its muddy resting place. As the torch beam illuminated the piece clearly for the first time, his breath caught in his throat. It was Charlotte's bracelet. The silver chain was tarnished and mud-stained, but the distinctive family crest was unmistakable. The phoenix rising from flames seemed to gleam with renewed life in the torchlight, and several of the tiny diamonds still sparkled despite the bracelet's ordeal. This was definitely the Pemberton family heirloom that Charlotte had worn on the night she disappeared. Marcus's mind raced as he carefully wrapped the bracelet in a clean cloth and secured it in an evidence pouch. The discovery raised more questions than it answered, but it was the first concrete evidence they had found since Charlotte's disappearance began. How had her bracelet ended up in this hidden chamber? Had Charlotte discovered this secret space herself, or had someone else brought the bracelet here? The implications were staggering. If Charlotte had found this chamber on her own, it suggested she might have been exploring the castle's hidden areas for some reason. But why would she venture into such a dangerous and isolated location in the middle of the night? And if someone else had placed the bracelet here, it implied that Charlotte's disappearance might not have been voluntary. Marcus carefully photographed the chamber and the exact location where he had found the bracelet, documenting every detail for the investigation. He made precise measurements and notes about the chamber's dimensions, construction, and contents. The hidden space would need to be thoroughly examined by forensics experts, but Marcus's initial assessment suggested it had been undisturbed for some time before the bracelet's arrival. The discovery also raised questions about the castle's security. How many other hidden passages and chambers existed within Ravenscroft's ancient walls? Had previous security assessments missed critical vulnerabilities? Marcus realized that a complete survey of the castle's underground areas would be necessary to ensure no other secrets remained hidden. As he prepared to leave the chamber and report his discovery, Marcus took one final look around the hidden space. The bracelet had been the only obvious clue, but he made mental notes about every detail that might prove relevant. The condition of the walls, the patterns of water damage, the types of debris on the floor, all of these factors could provide important information about when and how the bracelet had arrived in this location. The climb back through the opening proved more difficult than the descent, but Marcus managed to emerge from the hidden chamber without disturbing the evidence. He carefully replaced the loose stone, leaving the opening exactly as he had found it. With one crucial exception, he placed a small, nearly invisible mark on the wall to identify the location for the forensics team. Marcus's discovery of the bracelet represented the first major breakthrough in the investigation, but it also marked the beginning of what he sensed would be an even more complex mystery. Charlotte's disappearance was no longer simply a missing person case, it had become something far more sinister and puzzling. The captain's footsteps echoed through the cellars as he made his way back to the upper levels of the castle, his mind already working through the implications of his discovery. The bracelet would need to be examined by experts for trace evidence, and the hidden chamber would require a thorough forensic investigation. But, more importantly, the discovery suggested that Charlotte's disappearance was connected to the castle itself in ways that no one had previously considered. As Marcus emerged from the cellars into the morning light, he could see the highland mist beginning to lift from the surrounding mountains. The ancient castle seemed to watch him with knowing eyes, its weathered stones holding secrets that were only beginning to reveal themselves. The discovery of Charlotte's bracelet was just the first piece of a puzzle that Marcus sensed would challenge everything he thought he knew about the case. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn, and Marcus steeled himself for whatever revelations lay ahead. Charlotte's fate might depend on his ability to unravel the mysteries hidden within Ravenscroft's ancient walls, and he was determined not to fail her or the royal family who had placed their trust in him. The forensics laboratory at Edinburgh Castle buzzed with activity as Dr. Sarah Mitchell carefully examined Charlotte's recovered bracelet under powerful magnification equipment. Marcus stood nearby, watching every movement as the expert analyzed what might be their only concrete clue to the missing Duchess's whereabouts. The sterile environment of the lab felt worlds away from the damp, ancient cellars where the bracelet had been discovered, but both locations shared an air of intense focus and purpose. Dr. Mitchell was Scotland's foremost forensic jewelry expert, called in specifically for this high-profile case. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her steady hands moved with the precision of someone who had spent decades examining evidence that could make or break criminal investigations. The powerful lights of her workstation illuminated every detail of the tarnished bracelet as she worked. The clasp shows definite signs of force, Dr. Mitchell announced, adjusting her magnifying lens. This bracelet wasn't simply removed, it was torn off, probably during some kind of struggle or rapid movement. She pointed to the delicate mechanism that would normally secure the bracelet around a wearer's wrist. The silver metal was bent and partially broken, with tiny scratches that suggested it had been pulled apart quickly. Marcus leaned closer to examine the damage she was indicating.
Could it have been damaged by the conditions in the chamber where I found it? The moisture and debris? No, Captain.
This type of damage occurs to living metal that's been worn and handled regularly. The patina and wear patterns on the rest of the bracelet are consistent with regular use, but this damage to the clasp is fresh. I'd estimate it occurred within the last month, which aligns with your timeline for Lady Charlotte's disappearance. The implication sent a chill through Marcus's spine. If the bracelet had been forcibly removed from Charlotte's wrist, it suggested she had been in some kind of distress when it happened. The careful, deliberate way she had prepared for bed on the night she disappeared, folding her gown, organizing her jewelry box, seemed inconsistent with a situation that would result in her bracelet being torn off. Dr. Mitchell continued her examination, using various specialized tools to probe every surface of the bracelet. There are traces of organic material embedded in some of the decorative elements, she noted, carefully scraping microscopic samples into collection vials. Plant matter, possibly moss or lichen, and what appears to be limestone dust. The limestone is particularly interesting because it's not the same composition as the stone used in the main structure of Ravenscroft Castle.
Different limestone?
Marcus asked, his detective instincts immediately focusing on this detail.
What does that tell us? The limestone embedded in this bracelet comes from a different geological formation.
Ravenscroft Castle was built primarily from sandstone quarried locally, but this limestone has characteristics I associate with much older formations, possibly dating back several million years. It suggests the bracelet spent time in contact with ancient limestone, perhaps in caves or underground formations that predate the castle itself. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in his mind. The hidden chamber where he had found the bracelet was carved from living rock beneath the castle, but he hadn't examined the geological composition of that stone. If Charlotte's bracelet had been in contact with ancient limestone, it might indicate she had been taken to locations within the castle's foundations that were even older and more primitive than the chamber where he had made his discovery.
There's something else, Captain, Dr. Mitchell said, her voice taking on a tone of increased interest.
She had moved to a different piece of equipment and was examining the bracelet under ultraviolet light.
There are traces of what appears to be ink or dye on the silver chain. Very faint, but visible under UV. It's a deep purple color, possibly from fabric or paper that came into contact with the bracelet while it was wet. The purple ink intrigued Marcus immediately. He mentally reviewed everything he knew about Charlotte's possessions and activities during her stay at Ravenscroft. Her clothing had been primarily in greens and golds, colors that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. He couldn't recall any purple items among her belongings, and the castle's standard documentation was done with black ink on cream-colored paper.
Can you determine what type of ink or dye it might be?
Marcus inquired.
I'll need to run more detailed chemical analysis, but my preliminary assessment suggests it's not a modern commercial ink. The composition appears more consistent with historical ink formulations, the type that might have been used decades or even centuries ago. Iron gall ink, possibly, which was common in official documents and correspondence before modern fountain pen inks became standard. This revelation added another layer of mystery to Charlotte's disappearance.
Why would her bracelet have come into contact with historical ink? Was she examining old documents when she disappeared? Had she discovered something in the castle's archives that led to her current predicament? Marcus made detailed notes about every aspect of Dr. Mitchell's examination, ensuring that no potentially crucial detail would be forgotten.
The forensic analysis was providing valuable information, but it was also raising new questions that would require extensive follow-up investigation. After completing her initial examination, Dr. Mitchell carefully packaged the bracelet for additional testing.
I'll have complete chemical analysis results within 48 hours, she promised.
I'm also going to examine the bracelet for any DNA evidence, though the conditions where you found it may have compromised biological materials.
Marcus thanked the forensic expert and began the journey back to Ravenscroft Castle, his mind churning with the implications of what he had learned.
The forced removal of the bracelet, the ancient limestone traces, and the mysterious purple ink all suggested that Charlotte's disappearance was far more complex than anyone had initially suspected. The drive through the Scottish Highlands gave Marcus time to think and plan his next moves. The forensic evidence pointed toward Charlotte having been in areas of the castle that were both ancient and previously unknown to the current security arrangements. If there were hidden chambers and passages that predated even the oldest castle records, a complete architectural survey would be necessary. Upon returning to Ravenscroft, Marcus immediately sought out Professor Edmund Blackwood, the royal historian who maintained the castle's extensive archives. Professor Blackwood was a distinguished gentleman in his 70s, with a magnificent white beard and eyes that sparkled with intelligence behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He had devoted his entire career to studying the history of Scottish castles, and his knowledge of Ravenscroft's past was encyclopedic. Marcus found the professor in his usual location, the castle's library, surrounded by towers of ancient documents, maps, and architectural drawings. The room smelled of old parchment and leather bindings, with dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through tall windows. "Professor Blackwood, I need your expertise regarding the castle's underground areas," Marcus began, settling into a chair across from the historian's cluttered desk. "I've discovered a hidden chamber in the lower levels, and I'm wondering what other secrets might be concealed within these walls." The professor's eyes lit up with interest. "Ah, Captain, you've stumbled upon one of my favorite topics. Ravenscroft Castle has one of the most complex underground networks in all of Scotland. The current structure was built upon the foundations of at least 3 previous fortifications, each one incorporating and modifying what came before." Professor Blackwood stood and moved to a large table where he began unrolling an enormous map. The document was clearly ancient, hand-drawn with incredible detail and precision. "This is a survey completed in 1847 by the Royal Archaeological Society," he explained. "They were commissioned to map the castle's underground areas after a servant fell through a rotted floor and discovered a previously unknown chamber." Marcus studied the map with fascination. It showed a labyrinthine network of passages, chambers, and tunnels that extended far beyond what he had explored during his searches. Some areas were marked as sealed due to instability, while others bore notations like flooded or partially collapsed. "This chamber you discovered," Professor Blackwood continued, "can you describe its location and characteristics?" Marcus provided detailed information about the hidden chamber, including its dimensions, construction, and the method by which he had accessed it. The professor listened intently, occasionally consulting various documents and making notes. "Based on your description, I believe you found what the 1847 survey team designated as Chamber 7C, Professor Blackwood said, pointing to a specific location on the ancient map. "According to their notes, this chamber was part of the original medieval fortifications dungeon complex. It was sealed off in the early 1600s after a partial collapse made it unsafe for regular use." The revelation that Marcus had discovered a former dungeon chamber sent chills through his entire body. If Charlotte had somehow ended up in what was once a prison cell, the implications for her disappearance became dramatically more sinister. Dungeons were designed to hold people against their will, and, while this particular chamber had been sealed for centuries, someone had clearly reopened access to it recently. "Professor, are there other sealed chambers that might have been reopened? Other areas someone could access if they knew the castle's hidden passages?" Professor Blackwood spread out additional maps and documents. "The underground network is extensive, Captain. According to historical records, there are at least 37 distinct chambers and passages beneath the castle. Some connect to natural cave systems that extend for miles into the surrounding mountains. During times of war, entire populations could be hidden in these underground areas." Marcus studied the maps with growing concern. If someone with knowledge of the castle's hidden areas had taken Charlotte, she could be concealed virtually anywhere within a vast network of underground spaces. The search teams had focused on the known areas of the castle, but these maps revealed dozens of locations that hadn't been examined. "There's something else you should know, Captain," Professor Blackwood said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. He pulled out a leather-bound journal and opened it to a specific page. In 1923, there was another disappearance at Ravenscroft Castle. Lady Margaret Ashford, a cousin of the royal family, vanished during a weekend party.
She was never found, and the case was never solved. The parallels to Charlotte's situation were unmistakable. Another young woman from an aristocratic family, another unexplained disappearance from the castle, another investigation that had yielded no results. Marcus felt a growing sense of urgency as he realized they might be dealing with something far more sinister than an isolated incident. Were there any similarities between Lady Margaret's disappearance and what happened to Charlotte? Marcus asked. Professor Blackwood consulted his notes. Lady Margaret was last seen retiring to her chambers after an evening of entertainment, much like Lady Charlotte. Her room showed no signs of disturbance, and she seemed to have vanished without a trace. The investigation at the time focused on the possibility that she had eloped or suffered an accident in the surrounding countryside. Did they ever search the underground areas? Not thoroughly. The 1847 maps were considered historical curiosities rather than practical guides, and many of the sealed passages were thought to be permanently inaccessible. The focus was entirely on the possibility that Lady Margaret had left the castle voluntarily. Marcus realized that the investigation in 1923 had made the same assumptions that had initially guided Charlotte's case. Everyone had looked outward from the castle, searching the surrounding countryside for clues, when the answers might have been hidden directly beneath their feet all along. Professor, I need you to help me identify which of these sealed areas might be accessible to someone with the right knowledge and tools. If there's a connection between these disappearances, we need to explore every possibility. The historian nodded gravely and began marking locations on the map. These passages here connect to the natural cave system, he said, indicating a series of tunnels on the eastern side of the castle. And this area was never properly explored because of flooding issues. If someone had access to modern drainage equipment, these spaces could potentially be cleared and used. As Marcus studied the marked locations, he began to develop a comprehensive search plan. Each area would need to be carefully examined, but they would prioritize spaces that showed evidence of recent disturbance or access. The forensic evidence from Charlotte's bracelet suggested she had been in contact with ancient limestone, which narrowed their focus to the deeper, more primitive areas of the underground network. There's one more thing, Captain, Professor Blackwood said, his voice barely above a whisper. The chamber where you found the bracelet, Chamber 7C, has a particular history. According to the medieval records I've studied, it was used for more than just imprisonment. It was where the castle's interrogators conducted their most intensive questioning of prisoners. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. If someone had deliberately chosen that particular chamber for Charlotte's bracelet, they possessed not only knowledge of the castle's hidden passages but also an understanding of its darkest history. The discovery was no longer simply about finding a missing person, it had become a race against time to prevent history from repeating itself in the most terrible way possible. Marcus gathered all the maps and documents that Professor Blackwood could spare, knowing that the next phase of the investigation would require detailed knowledge of every passage and chamber beneath the castle. The forensic evidence had provided crucial clues, but it had also revealed the true scope of the challenge they were facing. As evening approached and shadows began to lengthen across the castle grounds, Marcus prepared for what he knew would be the most difficult and dangerous phase of the search for Charlotte. The answers they sought lay hidden in the darkness beneath their feet, in chambers that had remained sealed for centuries and passages that connected to mysteries spanning nearly 100 years. The discovery of Charlotte's bracelet had been just the beginning. Now the real investigation could begin. The specialized equipment arrived at Ravenscroft Castle just as the first hints of dawn began to illuminate the Highland peaks. Marcus had worked through the night, coordinating with various agencies to assemble the most advanced cave exploration and rescue gear available in Scotland. The courtyard now resembled a staging area for a major expedition, with thermal imaging cameras, ground-penetrating radar, portable lighting systems, and breathing apparatus carefully organized and tested. Detective Inspector Helen Crawford from Scotland Yard had arrived with the equipment, bringing her expertise in underground search operations. She was a compact woman with steel-gray hair and intense blue eyes that missed nothing. Her reputation for solving complex cases had brought her to the attention of the highest levels of law enforcement, and Marcus felt grateful to have her experience supporting the investigation. Captain Thornfield, I've reviewed all the evidence and Professor Blackwood's historical documentation, Inspector Crawford said as they examined the castle maps together. This is unlike any case I've encountered. The combination of historical disappearances, hidden chambers, and the specific forensic evidence from the bracelet suggests we're dealing with someone who has intimate knowledge of this castle's secrets. Marcus nodded, pointing to several locations on the 1847 survey map. We've identified 12 chambers and passage systems that warrant immediate investigation. The forensic evidence indicates Charlotte was in contact with ancient limestone and historical ink, so we're prioritizing the deeper, more primitive areas. The search team consisted of 6 specialists, each bringing unique skills to the operation. Beyond Marcus and Inspector Crawford, there was James MacLeod, a professional cave explorer who had mapped underground systems throughout Scotland, Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic archaeologist who could interpret evidence in historical contexts, Sergeant Robert Hayes, an expert in tactical operations and confined space rescue, and Dr. Mitchell, who would provide immediate forensic analysis of any evidence discovered. The team began their descent into the castle's lower levels as morning light strengthened outside. Unlike Marcus's previous solitary explorations, this operation was methodical and thoroughly documented. Every chamber was photographed, measured, and examined with multiple types of sensing equipment before any team member entered the space. Their first target was a flooded chamber system that Professor Blackwood's maps indicated had never been properly explored. The 1847 survey team had noted impassable due to water and moved on to other areas. However, Dr. Foster's analysis of recent water table changes suggested the flooding might have receded in recent decades, potentially making these areas accessible to someone with the right equipment. James MacLeod led the way through a passage that descended at a steep angle into the bedrock beneath the castle. The walls changed character as they moved deeper, transitioning from the dressed stones of the medieval construction to rough-hewn rock that showed tool marks from a much earlier era. The air grew noticeably colder and more humid with each step downward. These passages predate the castle by centuries, Dr. Foster observed, running her hands along the primitive tool marks in the stone. This work was done with iron tools, probably during the early medieval period or even earlier. The construction techniques are consistent with what we find in Celtic burial chambers and sacred sites. The passage opened into a circular chamber approximately 20 feet in diameter. The floor was partially covered with shallow standing water, but sophisticated drainage work had clearly been done recently. Fresh tool marks on the walls showed where modern equipment had been used to channel water away from the central area. "Someone's been working down here," Sergeant Hayes announced, his tactical training immediately recognizing signs of recent human activity. These drainage channels are new, probably completed within the last few months. The work required professional equipment and considerable expertise. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as the implications became clear. Someone had been systematically preparing the castle's hidden chambers for use, possibly for months before Charlotte's disappearance. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or passion, it was a carefully planned operation that required extensive knowledge and preparation. Inspector Crawford was examining the drainage work with her magnifying glass and evidence collection kit. The tool marks are consistent with professional excavation equipment. This wasn't done with hand tools, whoever did this work had access to power tools designed for underground construction. The team methodically searched the chamber, finding additional evidence of recent activity. Fresh scratches on the stone walls suggested heavy objects had been moved through the space. The standing water contained traces of modern chemicals, cleaning agents and disinfectants that indicated someone had been maintaining the area for regular use. Dr. Mitchell took water samples for analysis while James MacLeod used ground-penetrating radar to map the chamber's complete dimensions. The radar revealed additional passages leading away from the main chamber, some of which didn't appear on any of the historical maps. "Captain, you need to see this," MacLeod called from the far side of the chamber. His radar equipment had detected a void behind what appeared to be a solid wall. Closer examination revealed another carefully concealed entrance, this one blocked with stones that had been fitted so precisely they were nearly invisible unless examined from exactly the right angle. The team worked together to carefully remove the concealing stones, documenting each step with photographs and measurements. Behind the false wall lay a passage that had been completely unknown to previous investigators. The passage was narrow but tall enough for a person to walk upright, and it led deeper into the bedrock beneath the castle.
Dr. Foster's expertise proved invaluable as they explored this newly discovered passage. "The construction here is even more primitive," she noted, examining the rough walls with her flashlight. "This could date back to the original Celtic settlement that existed on this site before any castle was built. We might be looking at passages that are over 1,000 years old." The passage opened into a series of interconnected chambers that took Marcus's breath away. These weren't crude caves or simple storage areas, they were sophisticated underground spaces that had been carefully designed and constructed. The chambers were connected by short passages, creating a complex that could house multiple people for extended periods. "This is incredible," Inspector Crawford whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the ancient spaces. "This isn't just a hiding place, it's an underground facility that someone has been preparing for occupation. There's evidence of electrical work, modern ventilation systems, and what appears to be plumbing." The discovery of modern infrastructure in the ancient chambers sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Someone had spent enormous time and resources creating a sophisticated underground facility beneath Ravenscroft Castle, completely hidden from normal security procedures and building inspections. Sergeant Hayes was examining the electrical systems with growing amazement. "This is professional-grade work. Whoever did this installation knew exactly what they were doing. The wiring is properly shielded for underground conditions, and the ventilation system is designed to operate silently. This facility could support several people for weeks or even months." Marcus's mind raced as he began to understand the true scope of what they had uncovered. Charlotte's disappearance wasn't a simple abduction, it was part of a much larger operation that had been in planning and preparation for an extended period. The hidden facility suggested that whoever had taken Charlotte intended to keep her for a significant amount of time. Dr. Mitchell was conducting preliminary forensic examination of the chambers when she made a discovery that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. "I'm finding traces of recent human occupation," she announced, her voice tight with concern. "Hair fibers, skin cells, and fabric traces that are consistent with someone having been kept in these chambers within the last few weeks." The forensic evidence was compelling but circumstantial. They couldn't definitively prove that Charlotte had been held in these chambers, but the timeline and physical evidence strongly suggested it. More importantly, the sophisticated nature of the facility indicated that whoever had created it possessed resources and planning capabilities that went far beyond a typical criminal operation. Inspector Crawford was documenting every detail of the hidden facility when she discovered something that changed the entire character of the investigation. In one of the smaller chambers, she found a collection of historical documents and photographs that had been carefully preserved in waterproof containers. "Captain, these documents appear to be related to the 1923 disappearance of Lady Margaret Ashford," she said, her voice reflecting the gravity of the discovery. "There are photographs, newspaper clippings, and what appears to be personal correspondence. Someone has been studying that case extensively." Marcus examined the documents with growing alarm. The collection included detailed floor plans of Ravenscroft Castle, genealogical charts of the royal family and connected aristocratic houses, and extensive notes about security procedures and guard rotations. Most disturbing were the personal photographs of various young women from prominent families, including several recent images of Charlotte. "This isn't just about Charlotte," Marcus realized, the full scope of the conspiracy beginning to dawn on him. Someone has been planning operations against multiple targets over an extended period. The 1923 disappearance might not have been an isolated incident, it might have been a previous attempt by the same organization or individual. Dr. Foster was examining the historical documents with her expertise in archival analysis. These papers show signs of having been handled and studied repeatedly over many years. Some of the older documents date back to the 1920s, but there are recent additions and annotations. Someone has been maintaining this collection actively. The implications were staggering. The investigation team had uncovered evidence of what appeared to be a multi-generational conspiracy targeting young women from aristocratic families. The sophisticated underground facility, the careful study of historical cases, and the extensive planning evident in Charlotte's disappearance suggested they were dealing with an organization rather than an individual criminal. Sergeant Hayes was conducting a security assessment of the facility when he made another crucial discovery.
There are multiple exit points from this complex, he reported. At least 3 separate passages lead away from the main chambers, and they connect to different areas of the castle's foundation. Someone could enter or exit this facility without using the same route twice. The multiple access points explained how someone could have moved Charlotte from her chambers to the underground facility without being detected by the castle's security systems. They also suggested that the perpetrator might still have access to the facility, potentially monitoring the investigation team's activities. Marcus immediately ordered the team to establish security protocols for the underground complex. They couldn't risk having their investigation compromised by someone with knowledge of alternate entrances. However, the security measures also served another purpose. If Charlotte was still alive and being held somewhere within the extended underground network, they needed to prevent her captors from moving her to an even more remote location. As the team continued their exploration of the facility, they discovered evidence that suggested it was designed not just for holding captives, but for long-term occupation by the captors themselves. One chamber contained sleeping areas and personal belongings that indicated someone had been living in the underground complex regularly. This is someone's base of operations, Inspector Crawford concluded after examining the living quarters. They've been using this facility as headquarters for planning and executing operations against their targets. The level of organization and preparation suggests we're dealing with someone who views this as their primary occupation. The discovery of the underground facility transformed the investigation from a missing person case into a complex counterintelligence operation. The team realized they were not just searching for Charlotte, they were attempting to uncover and neutralize an organization that had been operating in secret for potentially decades. Dr. Mitchell's forensic analysis was revealing additional disturbing details about the facility's use. "I'm finding evidence of chemical restraints in several of the chambers," she reported grimly. "Traces of sedatives and other substances that could be used to keep captives compliant. The concentrations suggest repeated use over extended periods. The evidence painted a picture of systematic, long-term criminal activity that went far beyond anything the investigation team had initially imagined." Marcus realized that finding Charlotte was still their primary objective, but they had also stumbled upon something that could have implications for national security. As the team prepared to explore the additional passages leading away from the main facility, Marcus made the difficult decision to contact higher authorities. The scale and sophistication of what they had discovered required resources and expertise beyond what their current team could provide. However, time remained critical. If Charlotte was still alive, she had been missing for over 3 weeks. The evidence suggested she might be held somewhere within the extended underground network, but the facility they had discovered appeared to be abandoned. Whoever had been using it had clearly moved their operations to another location. The search for Charlotte had led them into the depths of a conspiracy that reached back through generations, but Marcus remained focused on their primary mission. Somewhere in the darkness beneath Ravenscroft Castle, a young woman's life hung in the balance, and every hour of delay potentially decreased their chances of finding her alive. The reinforcements arrived at Ravenscroft Castle under cover of darkness, their unmarked vehicles slipping through the Highland countryside like phantoms. Marcus watched from the castle's battlements as additional specialists disembarked, counter-terrorism experts, behavioral analysts, and a hostage rescue team from the elite Special Air Service. The investigation had escalated beyond anything he had experienced in his 15 years of service to the Crown. Commander Patricia Sinclair, head of the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command, took operational control of the expanded investigation. She was a formidable woman in her early 50s, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of commanding presence that could silence a room with a single glance. Her reputation for handling complex, high-stakes operations had earned her the personal confidence of the Prime Minister. "Captain Thornfield, your discovery of this underground facility has revealed something we've been tracking for several years," Commander Sinclair explained as they met in the castle's war room, surrounded by maps, photographs, and evidence boards. "We believe we're dealing with an organization that has been operating across Europe, targeting young women from prominent families for purposes we're still working to understand." Marcus felt a chill as the implications became clear. Charlotte's disappearance wasn't an isolated incident but part of a pattern that stretched across international boundaries. The sophistication of the underground facility suddenly made more sense if it was connected to a larger network of similar operations. What do we know about their methods and objectives?
Marcus asked, studying the intelligence files that Commander Sinclair had brought with her.
The pattern is consistent across multiple countries, she replied, opening a thick folder of case files. Young women from aristocratic or wealthy families disappear under circumstances that suggest inside knowledge of their security arrangements. The disappearances are always carefully planned, and, in most cases, no trace of the victims is ever found. The files contained photographs and case summaries from France, Germany, Austria, and other European countries. The similarities to Charlotte's situation were unmistakable. All the victims were young, attractive, and from families with significant social or political connections. All had disappeared from supposedly secure locations, and all had vanished without leaving any conventional evidence behind.
Have there been any successful rescues?
Marcus inquired, though he dreaded the answer.
Commander Sinclair's expression darkened.
3 attempts in the past 5 years.
2 resulted in the recovery of remains, and 1 victim was found alive but severely traumatized. She was able to provide some intelligence about the organization's methods, but much of what she experienced was too disturbing for detailed disclosure. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders. Charlotte had been missing for over 3 weeks, and if the pattern held true, time was running out rapidly. However, the discovery of the underground facility at Ravenscroft provided them with their first real opportunity to strike back at the organization.
The facility you discovered is the most sophisticated we've encountered, Commander Sinclair continued. The level of planning and investment suggests this location held special significance for their operations.
We believe Ravenscroft may have been their primary base for British operations.
The behavioral analyst, Dr. Rebecca Walsh, had been studying the personal belongings and documents found in the underground facility. She was a slight woman with penetrating dark eyes and an intensity that came from years of profiling the minds of dangerous criminals. The individual responsible for creating this facility exhibits characteristics of extreme narcissism combined with obsessive-compulsive tendencies, Dr. Walsh explained, gesturing to photographs of the meticulously organized chambers. The attention to detail, the historical research, and the systematic approach to victim selection indicate someone who views themselves as intellectually superior to law enforcement.
Marcus studied the behavioral profile with interest.
Understanding their adversary's psychology might provide insights into where Charlotte could be held and how they might approach a rescue operation.
The perpetrator likely has extensive knowledge of the castle's history and architecture, Dr. Walsh continued.
This suggests either a long-term connection to Ravenscroft or access to historical archives that aren't generally available to the public.
They may have posed as a researcher, contractor, or even a member of the castle staff.
The possibility that Charlotte's captor had been working within the castle's own security perimeter sent shockwaves through Marcus's understanding of the case. He immediately began reviewing personnel files and visitor logs, searching for anyone who had shown unusual interest in the castle's historical features or underground areas.
Commander Sinclair had brought additional technical resources that would revolutionize their search capabilities. Ground-penetrating radar systems that could map underground structures to depths previously impossible, acoustic monitoring equipment that could detect sounds through solid rock, and thermal imaging systems capable of identifying human heat signatures through multiple layers of stone. The technical team began a comprehensive survey of the underground network, using Professor Blackwood's historical maps as a starting point but expanding far beyond the areas that had been previously documented. The radar systems revealed a complex of passages and chambers that extended for miles beneath the castle and into the surrounding countryside.
This underground network is far more extensive than anyone realized, reported Dr. James Harrison, the team's geological expert.
Some of these passages connect to natural cave systems that extend deep into the Highland Mountains.
If someone wanted to hide captives in this network, they could move them dozens of miles from the castle without ever coming to the surface.
The scale of the underground system presented both opportunities and challenges.
While it provided numerous possibilities for finding Charlotte, it also meant that a comprehensive search could take weeks or months to complete.
Time they might not have if Charlotte's captors decided to relocate her again.
Marcus proposed a strategic approach based on the evidence they had gathered.
The forensic analysis of Charlotte's bracelet showed traces of ancient limestone and historical ink.
If we prioritize areas with those specific characteristics, we can focus our search on the most probable locations. Dr. Foster's archaeological expertise proved crucial in identifying chambers that matched the forensic evidence profile. Her analysis of the limestone traces suggested Charlotte had been in areas where the original Celtic settlement had been located, probably chambers that predated even the medieval castle construction. These ancient chambers would have been sacred spaces for the original inhabitants, Dr. Foster explained, pointing to locations on the updated underground maps. They're typically located at specific depths and orientations that held religious significance. If someone chose these areas deliberately, they may have been trying to create psychological effects on their captives. The psychological warfare implications added another disturbing dimension to the case. The perpetrator wasn't just interested in holding Charlotte captive, they were attempting to break down her psychological resistance using the ancient, sacred spaces of the underground network. The search teams deployed with military precision, each group assigned to specific sectors of the underground network. They moved through the passages with advanced communication equipment that could maintain contact even through the thick stone barriers. Every chamber was methodically searched and documented, with particular attention paid to areas showing signs of recent disturbance. Marcus led one of the search teams through a series of chambers that Dr. Foster had identified as likely candidates based on the forensic evidence. The passages were older and more primitive than those they had explored previously, carved from living rock with tools that left distinctive marks. These chambers show signs of having been used for ritual purposes, Dr. Foster observed, pointing to carved symbols on the walls that were barely visible in their flashlight beams. The Celtic peoples who originally inhabited this area had complex religious practices that involved underground ceremonies. The ancient symbols seemed to watch them as they moved deeper into the network, their meaning lost to time but their presence suggesting that these spaces had held significance for countless generations. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Charlotte's captor had chosen these locations specifically for their psychological impact. The breakthrough came from Sergeant Hayes, who was leading a team through a section of passages that connected to the natural cave system. His radio crackled to life with excitement as he reported acoustic contact. "Command, we're hearing sounds of human movement approximately 200 meters north of our current position. The sounds are faint but consistent with someone trying to move quietly through the passages." Marcus felt adrenaline surge through his system as he redirected his team toward Hayes's location. After weeks of searching, they might finally be closing in on Charlotte's location. However, the acoustic contact also meant that their search activities had likely been detected by whoever was holding her. Commander Sinclair immediately implemented containment protocols, deploying teams to seal off potential escape routes while maintaining communication silence to avoid alerting the captors to the full scope of the operation. The hostage rescue specialists began preparing for immediate deployment, but they needed more precise location information before they could act. Dr. Harrison's geological survey revealed that the area where Hayes had detected sounds was part of a complex natural cave system that had been modified by human construction over many centuries. The combination of natural limestone formations and artificial chambers created an acoustic environment where sounds could travel in unexpected directions. The sounds Sergeant Hayes detected could be coming from any of 6 different chamber complexes in this area, Dr. Harrison reported. The limestone formations create acoustic channels that make it difficult to pinpoint exact locations. Marcus realized they needed a more sophisticated approach to locate Charlotte precisely without alerting her captors to their presence. The thermal imaging equipment might be able to detect human heat signatures, but the stone barriers and complex air circulation patterns in the underground network made thermal detection unreliable. The solution came from an unexpected source: the castle's own historical features. Professor Blackwood had mentioned that some of the underground chambers had been designed with acoustic properties that allowed communication between different areas. These speaking chambers had been used by the castle's medieval inhabitants to coordinate defensive operations. If we can access one of the speaking chambers, we might be able to hear conversations or other sounds from the areas where Charlotte is being held, Marcus proposed. The acoustic properties that allowed medieval defenders to communicate might help us locate her without giving away our position. Dr. Foster identified 3 speaking chambers that connected to the cave system where Hayes had detected movement. The chambers were located at different depths and orientations, providing multiple listening posts that could triangulate sound sources throughout the underground network. Marcus personally took position in the primary speaking chamber, a circular room with a domed ceiling that had been carved with precise acoustic properties. The chamber's design amplified and focused sounds from connected passages, creating an effect similar to a natural amphitheater. As Marcus settled into position with sensitive audio equipment, he could hear the faint echoes of movement from somewhere in the network below. The sounds were definitely human: footsteps, the rustle of clothing, and what might have been muffled voices. His heart raced as he realized they were finally close to finding Charlotte. The audio equipment was picking up more distinct sounds now, what sounded like a conversation between at least two people, though the words were too distorted by the acoustic properties of the chambers to be clearly understood. Marcus adjusted the equipment settings, trying to filter out the echo effects and isolate the actual voices. Suddenly, through the static and reverberation, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold: a woman's voice, weak but unmistakably distressed, calling for help. The voice was too faint and distorted to identify with certainty, but the timing and location suggested it could be Charlotte. Marcus immediately radioed the information to Commander Sinclair while maintaining his position in the speaking chamber. The hostage rescue team needed to know Charlotte's approximate location, but they also needed to move quickly before her captors decided to relocate her again. The sounds from the underground network were becoming more frequent and agitated, suggesting that Charlotte's captors were aware of the search activities and preparing to move. Time was running out, and Marcus knew that their next moves could determine whether Charlotte would be rescued alive or lost forever in the labyrinth beneath Ravenscroft Castle. The rescue operation launched at precisely 0300 hours, when the darkness of the Highland night provided maximum concealment for the tactical teams. Marcus found himself at the center of the most complex hostage rescue operation he had ever witnessed, coordinating between multiple specialist units while maintaining constant communication with the speaking chamber where they had detected Charlotte's voice. Commander Sinclair had deployed 3 separate teams through different access points to the underground network, each approaching the target area from a different direction to prevent the captors from escaping through alternate routes. The SAS hostage rescue specialists moved like shadows through the ancient passages, their night vision equipment and silenced weapons making them nearly invisible in the underground darkness. Marcus led the primary assault team through the passage system that connected most directly to the chamber where they believed Charlotte was being held. His 15 years of experience with the Royal Protection Service had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing quite like this descent into a labyrinth that seemed to exist outside normal time and space. The thermal imaging equipment was finally providing useful intelligence as they approached the target area. Dr. Harrison had identified 3 distinct heat signatures in a chamber complex approximately 50 meters ahead of their current position, 2 moving actively around the space and 1 that remained stationary, possibly restrained. Target chamber confirmed, Marcus whispered into his radio microphone. 3 heat signatures detected. 2 mobile, 1 stationary. Preparing for final approach. The passage leading to the target chamber showed clear signs of recent modification. Modern lighting had been installed along the walls, and the floor had been leveled and reinforced to allow easy movement of people and equipment. Someone had invested significant time and resources in making this particular area of the underground network functional for long-term use. As the team moved closer to their objective, Marcus could hear voices echoing through the stone passages. The acoustic properties of the underground network carried sound in strange ways, but he could distinguish at least 2 different male voices engaged in what sounded like an urgent conversation. "They know we're here," Sergeant Hayes whispered, his tactical experience immediately recognizing the agitated tone of the voices ahead. "They're discussing whether to move the hostage or stand and fight." Marcus felt the familiar calm focus that came over him during high-stakes operations. Every detail of the environment became crystal clear: the texture of the stone walls, the quality of the air, the subtle sounds that indicated human presence ahead. His team was well trained and fully prepared, but the confined spaces of the underground chambers would make the rescue operation extremely challenging. The passage opened into a circular chamber that took Marcus's breath away. Unlike the crude chambers they had explored earlier, this space had been transformed into something resembling a medieval throne room. Tapestries hung from the walls, candles provided flickering illumination, and elaborate furniture created an atmosphere of twisted grandeur. At the center of the chamber, secured to an ornate wooden chair, sat Lady Charlotte Pemberton. Marcus felt a surge of relief and anger as he saw Charlotte for the first time in over 3 weeks. She was alive, conscious, and appeared to be physically unharmed, though her face showed the strain of her ordeal. Her auburn hair was disheveled, and her clothing was worn and stained, but her eyes still held the intelligence and determination that Marcus remembered from their previous meetings. 2 men stood near Charlotte's chair, and Marcus immediately recognized that these were not common criminals. Both were well-dressed and appeared educated, carrying themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to authority. The older man, perhaps in his 60s, had silver hair and wore what appeared to be an expensive suit despite the underground location. The younger man, probably in his 30s, was armed with a pistol but held it with the familiarity of someone who had received professional training. "Captain Thornfield," the older man said, his cultured voice carrying a slight European accent. "I was wondering when you would find us. Your reputation for thoroughness is well deserved." Marcus kept his weapon trained on the 2 captors while signaling for his team to maintain their positions. The confined space and Charlotte's proximity to her captors made this an extremely delicate tactical situation. "Release Lady Charlotte immediately," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of his years of service. "You're surrounded, and there's no possibility of escape." The older man smiled with what appeared to be genuine amusement. "Ah, but, Captain, you misunderstand the situation entirely. Lady Charlotte is here because she chose to be. Isn't that correct, my dear?" Charlotte raised her head to look directly at Marcus, and he was shocked to see something unexpected in her eyes, not fear or desperation, but a complex mixture of shame and defiance. "It's true, Captain," Charlotte said, her voice stronger than Marcus had expected. "I came here voluntarily, though I didn't fully understand what I was agreeing to." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. After weeks of intensive investigation, the discovery that Charlotte had left the castle voluntarily seemed to undermine everything they had learned. However, his tactical training kept him focused on the immediate situation. Regardless of how Charlotte had arrived in the chamber, she was clearly being held against her will now. "Even if you came here initially by choice, Lady Charlotte, you're obviously being held against your will now," Marcus said firmly. "These restraints and the circumstances of your confinement constitute unlawful imprisonment." The older man gestured elegantly toward the elaborate furnishings around them. "Lady Charlotte has been treated as an honored guest. She has been provided with the finest accommodations, excellent meals, and fascinating conversation about subjects that her conventional education never addressed." Marcus began to understand that they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple kidnapping. The psychological manipulation evident in the chamber's decoration and the captor's demeanor suggested a sophisticated form of indoctrination or coercion. Charlotte spoke again, her voice carrying undertones of confusion and distress. "They promised to show me historical secrets about my family, Captain. Documents and artifacts that explain things about the Pemberton lineage that had been hidden for generations. I was curious, and I agreed to meet them in the castle's library after everyone had gone to bed." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place for Marcus. Charlotte's captors had used her intellectual curiosity and family pride to lure her into the underground chambers. Once there, they had gradually increased their psychological control over her, using a combination of isolation, manipulation, and possibly chemical substances to break down her resistance. "The Pemberton family has a remarkable history, Captain," the older man continued, his tone taking on the character of a lecture. "Lady Charlotte has been learning about her ancestors' connections to some of Europe's most significant historical events. Knowledge that certain parties have worked very hard to suppress." Marcus realized that the captors were members of some kind of historical conspiracy organization, possibly connected to the documents they had found in the underground facility. Their interest in Charlotte wasn't random, they believed her family possessed some kind of historical significance that made her valuable to their cause. Commander Sinclair's voice crackled in Marcus's earpiece, providing crucial tactical updates. "Primary team, be advised that we have identified and neutralized 3 additional subjects attempting to escape through the Western Passage system. You may have additional hostiles in your immediate area. The information confirmed that Charlotte's captors were part of a larger organization, and that the rescue operation had disrupted a significant criminal network. However, it also meant that the two men in the chamber might be desperate enough to harm Charlotte rather than allow her to be rescued. Your organization is finished, Marcus announced, hoping to create psychological pressure that would lead to Charlotte's peaceful release. We've discovered your entire underground network, seized your documents and equipment, and arrested your associates. Surrender now, and you'll be treated according to international law. The younger captor raised his pistol toward Charlotte, his expression showing the kind of fanatic determination that Marcus had encountered in terrorist operations. The cause is more important than any individual life, including our own, he declared. Lady Charlotte has learned too much about our research to be allowed to return to the outside world. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded combat, but the presence of Charlotte in the line of fire required a different approach than his usual tactical responses. He needed to create an opportunity to neutralize the armed captor without endangering Charlotte. What research? Marcus asked, hoping to keep the captors talking while his team maneuvered into better positions. What could possibly be worth risking Lady Charlotte's life? The older man's eyes lit up with the fervor of someone discussing their life's passion. The European aristocratic families have been manipulated for centuries by secret organizations that control political and economic power from behind the scenes. We have documented evidence of conspiracies that reach to the highest levels of government and international finance. Marcus recognized the rhetoric of conspiracy theorists, but the sophistication of their operation suggested these individuals had moved far beyond theoretical discussions into active criminal behavior. Their research had apparently convinced them that kidnapping and holding prominent individuals was justified by their larger cause. Even if your theories were correct, Marcus said, continuing to buy time for his team, holding Lady Charlotte against her will accomplish nothing constructive. Release her, and you can pursue your research through legal channels. The younger captor's weapon remained trained on Charlotte, but Marcus could see uncertainty beginning to creep into his expression. The reality of being surrounded by professional law enforcement was apparently penetrating the ideological fervor that had sustained him through the planning and execution of Charlotte's abduction. Charlotte herself began to speak, her voice gaining strength as she addressed her captors directly. You've shown me documents and artifacts, but you've also lied to me repeatedly. The historical connections you claim exist between my family and various conspiracies are based on speculation and misinterpretation, not solid evidence. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for Charlotte's courage and intelligence. Despite weeks of psychological manipulation and physical confinement, she had retained her critical thinking abilities and was now actively working to defuse the situation. The evidence is overwhelming, the older captor insisted, but Marcus could hear doubt creeping into his voice as well. The patterns of influence and control are clearly documented across multiple centuries. Patterns that you've created by selectively interpreting historical events to support your predetermined conclusions, Charlotte replied firmly. I may have been curious about my family's history, but I'm not naive enough to accept conspiracy theories as established fact. The psychological dynamics in the chamber were shifting as Charlotte's defiance undermined the captor's confidence in their cause. Marcus signaled for his team to prepare for immediate action while continuing to monitor the situation for the optimal moment to intervene. The breakthrough came when the younger captor's attention wavered for just a fraction of a second. Marcus's tactical training took over, and he moved with the speed and precision that had made him one of the Royal Protection Service's most valued officers. The disarming technique was executed perfectly, and, within seconds the younger captor was neutralized without a shot being fired. The older captor surrendered immediately when confronted with the reality of his situation. The elaborate chamber that had seemed like a fortress of his ideological cause was revealed to be nothing more than a prison that had trapped him as surely as it had held Charlotte. Marcus personally freed Charlotte from her restraints, noting the evident relief in her eyes as the ordeal finally came to an end. Are you injured, Lady Charlotte? He asked, his professional concern mixing with genuine care for someone he had worked so hard to find. Physically, I'm unharmed, Charlotte replied, rubbing circulation back into her wrists where the restraints had chafed. Psychologically, I'll need some time to process everything that's happened.
They were very skilled at manipulation, and there were moments when I almost began to believe their theories. The rescue operation had been successful, but Marcus knew that the investigation was far from over. The underground network at Ravenscroft Castle had revealed a criminal organization with international connections, historical documents that would require extensive analysis, and questions about how such a sophisticated operation had been established without detection. As they made their way back through the ancient passages toward the surface, Marcus reflected on the complexity of what they had discovered. Charlotte's bracelet, found in that first hidden chamber weeks earlier, had been the key that unlocked a mystery spanning generations. The investigation had revealed not just a kidnapping, but a conspiracy that touched on some of the darkest aspects of European history and the eternal human tendency to find patterns and meaning in the chaos of events. Charlotte walked beside him through the underground passages, her rescue representing not just the successful conclusion of a missing person case, but the disruption of a criminal network that had operated in the shadows for years. The ancient stones of Ravenscroft Castle had witnessed many secrets over the centuries, but few as strange and disturbing as the one they had uncovered in the depths beneath the Highland fortress. The morning sun was rising over the Scottish Highlands as they emerged from the castle's lower levels, bringing Charlotte back into a world she hadn't seen for over 3 weeks. The investigation would continue for months as authorities worked to understand the full scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered, but Marcus felt the satisfaction of knowing that his dedication and thoroughness had brought Charlotte home safely. The discovery of Charlotte's broken bracelet in that damp cellar had been just the beginning of a journey that led them through centuries of history and into the twisted minds of people who had confused obsession with research and kidnapping with justice. But it had also demonstrated the power of methodical investigation, professional expertise, and the unwavering determination to never give up on someone who needed help. Charlotte's ordeal was over, but the lessons learned during her rescue would influence security procedures and investigations for years to come. The ancient castle had revealed its secrets reluctantly, but those secrets had ultimately led to justice and the safe return of a remarkable young woman who had survived an experience that would have broken many others. Marcus looked back at Ravenscroft Castle as they walked toward the waiting vehicles, knowing that he would never see the ancient fortress in quite the same way again. The stones that had seemed so solid and permanent had concealed a hidden world of passages and chambers, conspiracies and crimes that spanned generations. The discovery of one small bracelet had opened doorways to mysteries that challenged everything he thought he knew about history, security, and the lengths to which obsessed individuals would go in pursuit of their twisted ideals.